Welcome back to the Intelligent Human Leadership Podcast, where you become the most intelligent leader, leading yourselves and your teams. I'm so grateful that you guys are back here for another episode. And I want to share one that is targeting on the topic of wisdom. Now, in today's age, we have so much information coming at us, but there's a difference between just information and knowledge. And I want to get into this because, particularly in the industry that I've spent my career in, the AEC industry, architecture, engineering, construction, environmental consulting, we focus a lot on knowledge, technical understanding, and these are all good things. However, I'm going to challenge you today on this episode of the podcast to see if you're leaning into true wisdom. So here's how this came about for me today. One of the things I'm doing in my part of my impossible game, and you guys may have heard of me talk about this before, in my goals for the year, I look at different elements, and one of those things, I've never actually done this, having read the Bible in a chronological fashion. For those of you that are not familiar, the Bible is obviously a bunch of books. Probably most people know about the Bible. However, it's not put out in chronological order. The books are not, and so I've been going through that this year, and I'm in the portion now on the book or Proverbs. So Proverbs are all written based on this King Solomon, who still is regarded as one of the wisest men that has ever lived. And so I've read other wisdom literature, such as the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, others. And so this pursuit of wisdom tied with knowledge is really, really important. And so just to get some baseline understanding, so we're all talking the same language here in this episode. For me, what I look at knowledge is it's an accumulation of facts, it's an accumulation of information, skills, experience, education. We go get a degree, we're acquiring knowledge, we're getting these facts and we store them all up. For those of you that are sports fans, you gain a lot of knowledge watching the game, taking the stats, right? You can learn a lot that way. That's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Some people say I have lots of useless knowledge in my head as a Star Wars fan, as a pop culture following different things. However, what's really going to be important in the focus of this episode today is wisdom. Wisdom, the ability to take that knowledge and information and think and act uh, using all of the knowledge, experience, understanding, this insights that we've learned. And so it's taking that all that information, it's transforming that in a way that we're able to act upon. And unfortunately, many times we have a lot of knowledge, but we're not acting wise. And so this is my conversation I have with you today. I want to dive into this of understanding, are you living a wise life? Are you living and applying these things that you've accumulated, this information? You see some books and things behind me. There's lots of information I've accumulated. But what good is it if I'm not applying it well, if I'm not living well? And so I'm coming at this because oftentimes, particularly those of you in the AEC industry, you may be a biologist, an engineer, you have tremendous facts, information that you've brought into your brain, and we focus a lot on that technical knowledge, but we can overlook the broader application of wisdom and why are we doing the things that we're doing. And so, again, I want to empower you to be the most intelligent human leader, knowing yourself well, so that as you understand this about yourself and you lead yourself well, that you can actually demonstrate that and show that for others and recognize and help them, call them up if they're getting stuck in all this technical jargon. I'm gonna say garbage. I almost said that, but jargon, or they're getting so focused in the weeds that they're not stepping back and looking and applying this wisely. There's a lot of this, unfortunately, in our society, and so I want to help you today in this podcast, in this discussion, as to how we can break it down. And oftentimes, the way I look at this is I look at the things external to us. Start there. Look at how we evaluate and make decisions based on our technical expertise, And oftentimes we have a challenge before us, and you could go through and say logically, if you will, hey, we're going to do these steps. But if you don't step back a little bit and say, is this wise? Is this There's a great quote. I'm going to misquote it here, but there's a great quote in the book Jurassic Park. In one of the characters who he pauses, he said, we can create dinosaurs, but maybe is that the wisest thing to do? He pauses this question in that story. And sometimes we just think we can and we know it, well, we should do it. And so in decision makings, we need to pause oftentimes instead of just rushing ahead and looking forward. And this takes good counsel. This takes good mentorship. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and so you seek out wise counsel. Um, and so there's questions and things brought up. In fact, in one of the classic stories in the Bible, and King Solomon is faced with this dilemma of two women coming to him claiming that this baby is both theirs. They both say this baby is mine, and so Solomon makes a statement that, hey, if this baby is both of yours and you both want it, and neither one is, um, backing off their claim. He said, let's cut the baby in half. You might have heard of that statement, and we'll just give it to each one of you. And the one woman says, yeah, go ahead and do it. The mother, so-called mother, and the other mother says, please don't do this, don't do this. And by that act, Solomon was able to distinguish and understand, oh, he was wise enough to recognize the woman that was saying, "Yeah, cut the baby in half. That's okay. We'll both get it." Really wasn't the true mother. It was the mother that would give up her child to this other woman just so that this baby would not be killed. Very wise. We want you to be wise in your understanding and applying knowledge and being, in this case, Solomon was being a judge, if you will. And so I've gotten stuck this way before and myself of doing certain things or working on tasks, uh, working on maybe like a spreadsheet or going all these detailed things instead of, you know, asking for feedback or getting counsel as to maybe is this the wisest way to spend my time or energy, only to come back and look up and talk with a project manager about a blown budget because I personally didn't spend the time to get clarity on the amount of how I was going to structure my time, focusing on putting a deliverable together, for example. And so therefore, I was just doing things. I was technically, yes, doing the work, but it wasn't the most important or impactful. And this also will affect your credibility too, especially depending on what people value in an organization and what they see as a wise use of time or resources. So it's important that you look and you get understanding and collaboration from your team members. Don't work in a silo. Um, think about this long-term perspective, understanding clients' needs, adapting to industry changes. Don't just keep doing it the same way or we're technically this way. How do we adjust? Um, what are the needs there? And so coming up and being creative in your response. This is what wisdom because you can present something that wasn't considered before. And oftentimes people are a little hesitant to do that because they're like, well, that's out of the norm. We haven't done it that way before. But a wise person will pause and ask the questions, will be curious. That's what part of my job as a coach is to ask questions, is to help you get clear on, is this the wisest thing I should be doing? Is this the best way to apply the knowledge and the information I have? That is super important. And so when you have a team that you can rely on, or outside consultants, or like myself, you want to lean on those folks that have been and gone before you, that have experienced these different um, events, if you will. uh, for example, I work with a lot of processes and systems. I used to run our Deltec user uh, group here in Southern California, where I was working with different CFOs, accounting controllers. I was one of the few project managers. And so what happened was I realized very quickly that yes, I could learn certain things in the system, But if I was working and doing certain things in the system and it didn't resonate or didn't have the desired impact with key stakeholders, like the accounting team, I needed to move. I needed to adjust. So it's one thing to learn things, is another thing to apply it in a wise manner. And thankfully, I was open. I received feedback. I was able to then build bridges and connections with my team. And so that was, and then I could take that with my team. So my team, meaning the team that I was reporting to, and the team that I was leading of other biologists and project managers. And so there's other things here as we go. So, I talked a little bit about some of these external areas, but when we turn internally, this is really, I feel like, the most impactful, because you're looking at the wisdom for self-reflection and from experiences. So I've mentioned this on a number of different episodes. So if you guys haven't gotten to listen to Change Your Story or the Stack, these are great tools that I use to help reframe and knowledge or input and put it in a powerful way that we can act upon. Put it in even a production system, if you will. So I read a lot of Stoic literature as well. This is going to challenge your understanding of taking an information and then how do you apply it to it. Uh, for example, Marcus Aurelius has a number of writings, but you see him, if you're not familiar with him, a Roman emperor, and he wrote this series of insights as to his daily living and how he was processing information, and so it helps you to understand, are you living wise? Are you just kind of living and just taking in knowledge and information? And here's the challenge that we face today more than ever. As we look internally, we get a lot of information coming at us. And I'm, as a connector voice for the users of gone back to your leadership voice, I can absorb a lot of information. Actually, it doesn't bother me. Some people get overwhelmed. That doesn't bother me. But what happens is, while I can take in a lot of information, this is about knowing yourself well. It's another thing to then actually apply it and use it. So I have a tendency to take in, but I want also to create and produce and have visible fruit of the impacts of what I'm consuming. So just think about this. Think about how you're developing your wisdom. And maybe you're not. Maybe you're just a consumer. And oftentimes that's where we start. We are consuming. But how is that showing up in your life? How is that fruit coming out? One way you may see it is in your emotional intelligence, your emotional IQ. Sometimes people say this idea of empathy and patience and understanding as we lead ourselves. As you're wise, you'll recognize, while you can do certain things, you can have a snarky comment, you can do these things, and you have knowledge even about somebody's inadequacies, somebody's that is uh, out of integrity with their words, and you can use it to either call them up, like I like to say, or you can use it to cut them down. What the challenge here is, how do you be wise to engage a person? We see many times nowadays, especially on social media, where you may be drawn into a conversation. How many of you have done this? I have. I've backed off from this quite a bit now, but there's a conversation. Somebody throws out a statement. Uh, it's almost like a hook or baiting you into a conversation. You see it, especially I see it on social media, or there's a post and people make all these different comments and they're not very productive. And I would say, honestly, they're just throwing out information. Um, but to what end, right? If we're just throwing around facts and figures or statements that even backed up sometimes with reality, or what, to what end? Is that a wise use of our focus? Is that a wise use of our voice? Because I would argue likely not. Now, there may be instances that it is, but I want to challenge you to look at that and look. And if you, this one thing to do it internally, I want you to also look and say, are you bringing in other people into your life to hold a mirror up to you? And this is what a coach does. This is what I'm passionate about, is helping people see themselves. Really, it's just reflecting back and asking them the questions. Is this really how you want to show up? Is this really how you want to lead or impact others? Are you even leading people because of the way you are showing up? Your emotional intelligence is one of those ways. If you're not understanding and don't have the capacity, the maturity, if you will, to recognize where people are on their own journey and you're being triggered, you're having these tendencies to respond, to react in a way that is counterproductive ultimately. And you're like, man, I am not getting what I want out of this relationship. I'm not getting what I want out of this situation. I'm frustrated. I'm angry. I'm disconnected. Uh, we're not acting in a wise way. If you're truly acting in a wise manner, some of the ways you're going to be able to see that is the peace. I've talked about this in the previous episodes. You guys can check out the Peace Index. It's a great assessment tool that I have as part of being a giant guide. And again, as you're listening to this episode, if you're hearing things like, "Man, that's ringing, that's resonating, David, that's ringing true," message me if you're feeling stuck or you're like, man, I could just get over this hump or have this a conversation and find out if the resources and the books and the information that I have, right, knowledge can be applied in a way that actually not only benefits you but benefits those around you. And they're like, man, this person in my life is truly wise. Have you had somebody say that to you today? Are you living in a wise way? Or on the flip side, are they saying, man, this guy is a fool, he doesn't understand what the heck he's talking about. He is just completely not there emotionally in the way he's showing up. There's ways we can cultivate balancing knowledge and wisdom. And there's techniques here that we can develop. And again, I can't solve all of them here on the podcast. I can't answer all of them. That's why I have my Steward Yourself program so that you can come together and we work on that week by week using the tools and the resources to get you in clarity, get you in power so that you're coming in a place of true wisdom. You're in a daily place of encountering knowledge, transferring that into wisdom in the way that you make decisions, the way that you show up, the way that you communicate with others. So, another element that I want you to consider here is this: how you show up ethically with integrity, the way you make your decisions, and you're making moral and ethical standards. Here's the reality is, why do we have judges? They're interpreting the laws. If we don't need judges, if everybody lived and got it all, looked at it all the same, that's why we have judges. Well, part of the reason why we have judges is to apply knowledge and use wisdom, right? Our laws are based on our values. Now, our values may shift, our cultural focus may shift. I'll grant you that. However, I want you to show up as the most intelligent leader, which means being wise. And so think about how you show up as a leader, how your wisdom shapes you, your vision, your strategy, how you influence the team. This is important. This is very important. You have the ability to exercise discretion. You have the ability to just don't be a robot, but to think of yourself as a judge, if you will, and applying wisdom to knowledge and the law, right? The law is just here's what it is, and then you have to interpret the law. And that's where wisdom comes in. There's knowledge, here's what's written, here's what it is, and now we're applying our understanding and how this needs to be. Somebody that can bridge those two well is not just on, well, it says this, it says this. Yes, I understand it says this. How am I applying this? How is this being interpreted? And and again, linking that up based on your experience and the knowledge you've acquired. We want you to be that wisest person and the healthiest person in the room. So as you live this way, I encourage you, this is a lifelong learning process, right? I'm sharing with you my journey along the way and the resources, the tools that I found at 50 years old that have helped me and put me in a much better place where I'm positively impacting my circle of influence from me to my wife, to my children, to my community, radiating that out to my coworkers. So really think about that. There's just some practical steps I'm just going to leave you with here as we're getting to the end of our podcast. This episode, I could go definitely deeper, but I want to give you some practical tools you can use today. Look at mentors that cultivate wisdom, that exemplify that they take the technical knowledge, you know that they know their stuff technically, but then they can apply that and look at the fruits of their life. That's why I share this podcast with you, to encourage you, to show you, lead from what I live. It's about who I'm being, so that in being you have all of this things that you're seeking in life, but it starts from a place of being and understanding who I am. Look at reflective practices, perhaps journaling, or like I said, stacking, meditation. I've talked about that as like you can go back to early episode of like reducing stress to gain deeper insights and connection. Um, to me, spirituality is super important, but look for reflective practices in your own life that get you quiet and able to kind of step away from the noise and all this information is coming at you, and kind of lay things down. And you can, like I said, check out the tool. I have the Warrior app. I have so many other resources I'm happy to share with you guys. I'd love to have a conversation, get you those resources and get you in the Steward Yourself program. But nonetheless, you can just listen to this podcast and take some practical actions today. So even if it's a 5-minute meditation where you're kind of clearing your head, stepping back, but look, and look in the way you're engaging in the world. Diverse projects, you're looking at maybe engaging in different perspectives, insights from different people. Be willing to be challenged in your understanding, learn from others, actively listen. Don't just hear, but actively listen, so that you can you know, recognize and learn from the mistakes of others where people have missed out. So here we're just getting into it. We're just scratching the surface. There's so much more in wisdom. If you're so inclined to join me and provide feedback on Proverbs, I'm reading that right now. That is the Old Testament, on the Torah, if you will, in the Jewish tradition, where you can go back and look at this wisdom literature. And one of the verses I'll leave you with is out of the book Proverbs 4, where it talks about this verse where I highlighted today. Proverbs 4, verse 7 says, "Getting wisdom is the wisest thing you can do, and whatever else you do, develop good judgment." We want you to be developing that good judgment, showing up in a powerful, authentic way with your emotional IQ and intact, right? Helping you become the smartest, most intelligent leader in the room, leading yourself well with understanding, maturity, insights, letting that light shine within you and benefiting those around you. That's where I invite you to come and have a conversation with me. Um, Follow along. I will continue to provide great resources as we're going through this year. We're in June 2024 as I'm recording this episode. Hard to believe uh, that we're going to be having some live events actually coming down here in later on this year. So follow along, Steward Your Business. If you're not already, I'm on all the different platforms there. Your 5-star review of this podcast is very much appreciated. It helps get the word out. Your comments and feedback are absolutely welcome. And I I appreciate you guys just taking the time and spending it with me here today. I hope this knowledge and information you've taken will help you be a wiser person. Again, that most intelligent human leader. And until then, have an amazing day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.